Hey there, I'm Joe Eames, and I want to talk to you about your Angular unit tests because you are probably doing them wrong. I was recently giving a talk at a conference and talking about doing Angular unit tests and better ways to do them. And after the conference, so many people came up to me and said, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I could run my tests that way. And the problem is the Angular CLI tells us to do our tests a certain way, and it gives them to us when it creates them for us in a specific way, and we just blindly follow along with what it's doing. And the reality is the CLI is giving you the wrong information. It's telling you to do wrong things. And so I'm here to correct that. I'm here to show you why you're doing your Angular tests wrong, probably, and how to fix it, how to make them better, how to make them easier to write, easier to maintain, and how to make them run tons faster. And I'll talk about some results about speed of running unit test suites at the end when I'm done here. So before I get into the code here and we start looking at some actual code, I just want to talk really quickly about ng-conf. ng-conf is coming up. This is the biggest Angular conference. It's the original Angular conference, official Angular conference. The entire Angular team attends, and we absolutely want you there, which is why we've got a special $200 discount code. If you click the link down below, I guess it's going to be somewhere underneath the screen here. If you click that link down below, that'll get you $200 off your ticket. And I've been at ng-conf every year. I help organize it, and it is absolutely no lie. This is the best tech conference that exists, and it's also the place where you're going to get all the best information about Angular. So if you're doing any kind of Angular or you want to do Angular, you absolutely need to attend ng-conf. So many people that have attended have had their careers radically improved and changed by meeting people and making great connections and solving a lot of problems they just couldn't solve any other way. So love to see you there. Now let's talk about what's wrong with Angular tests, and this really comes down to the difference between isolated and integration tests. So do you know what the difference is between an isolated and an integration test in Angular? I'm not talking about the general term for integration tests, but in Angular, the difference between isolated and integration tests. If you don't, you're probably doing your tests wrong. So let's look at a little code here. This, what I have up here on the screen, is just your typical component. Very simple. Very, very scaled down to be easy to understand. Super easy component and regular old Angular component, right? What a lot of people don't really process all the time in their head is that if we come into this component and do this and remove that decorator, what we're looking at is just plain old JavaScript. Whether the decorator is there, whether it's not, I'm removing it so you just don't think about it, but this is just regular old JavaScript. We don't need something fancy to run a test on JavaScript code. But the CLI gives you this big test bed that does all these things. And when we're trying to test our components, we think that we have to use the test bed in order to do all this stuff. But the test bed is big, it's heavy, it takes a lot of time to set up. It takes processing time while you're running your tests. And it's really complex to manage and to create it right and to configure everything correctly. But when we're dealing with our components, we're just dealing with regular old JavaScript code. So if we think of our components like just JavaScript and not some really complex Angular thing that we need a big engine in order to run, if it's just JavaScript, then that opens up the possibilities for testing. So I'm going to show you this test. This is a test that the CLI created, and I made one small change down here on line 22 where I say expect component.order.id to be 1. That was a subtle change from what the default CLI gave me, but it's pretty much exactly the way that the CLI creates a test for us. So other than the fact that this actually tests that actual component that I showed you, which if you saw in its ng on init, it creates an order, a default order which has an ID of 1. Right? But this test is what the CLI gives us, and this is our starting point that we're given in order to write our tests. And so we just move on blindly thinking this is the right way to do things. But I'm going to show you the magic. I'm going to show you a magic trick here. And I want you to follow very closely as I modify this code because I'm going to show you something absolutely magic. All right, I'm going to go right up here and I'm going to start here. And I'm going to start doing this. And notice what I'm doing here. Notice how I'm doing this. Notice what I'm doing. I'm just getting rid of stuff. Okay, now I'm going to come into my it block, and I'm going to do something pretty wild. And then I'm going to call that function. Now this is crazy. I understand. I've removed all this code. But the honest truth is, this code right here is absolutely identical to the test that we had before. This test and the tests that we had before are 100% doing the same exact thing. The only difference, this is tons simpler and it's tons faster to execute. All right? The only thing that Testbed was doing for me was initializing my customers component, but it's a JavaScript component. It's just a JavaScript class. This is a class. We can create an instance of it by just calling new on it. We don't have to use the testbed to create an instance of the customers component. We could do that ourselves. And then the other thing it does is when we run detect changes, is that calls lifecycle events. So the ng-on-init is executed when we do our very first detect changes. And I just called that manually here. So I get to determine when the component's initialized and when that code is actually run. And then my expect statement is just exactly the same as it was. This is the same test as before, but it's just tons simpler. Look at that code, how much simpler it is. Now let's talk about performance differences. At this conference, I was talking with a couple of people on their project. They had something like 9,000 unit tests, and it was taking them between 8 and 10 minutes to execute those unit tests. And they were using the default way. They were doing the test bed and doing the default thing that Angular tells us to do with the CLI. Talked with another individual later on who was really grateful that I've been talking about this because they were finding the same thing that not a lot of people knew, that you could do isolated tests like this that were so much better, and had said that they had gone to fully isolated tests and they had gone to Jest, and they were executing 40,000 unit tests in about 4 minutes. Think of that difference, 9,000 in 10 minutes and 40,000 in 4 minutes. That's a huge performance gain. And when you're talking about executing a test suite, every second counts. The faster you can execute your test suites, the more likely you're going to execute them and run the entire thing, and the easier it is to find out if you've broken anything in your code. Now, what are the drawbacks of not using the test bed? Well, the main drawback is you can't test your templates. That's something that you can only do with the test bed. So if you need to run tests against your template, you will need to use the test bed. But most of the logic that we write is going to be in the component itself and not in the template. The template tends to have just very simple stuff. So the honest truth is we don't necessarily need to test the template as much as we may think we do. And we can do most of our testing, if not all of our testing, just by testing the components themselves. So there you go. That is how to write better tests, and that's why if you're just following along what the CLI is doing, you're probably doing your Angular unit tests wrong. Hey there, thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.